I prefer a Corvette when I'm a young man than when I'm an older man. Because when I have a Corvette when I'm an older man, everyone just asks what I'm compensating for, and
Don't worry, baby. I'll be gentle.
I could bake bread with my own feces and then say, you know what, this smells terrible.
This coffee smells like
It is Austin.
Oh, good, then it's not just me.
I'm going to use this goat feces over here.
Uh-huh.
I didn't have to have a connection with the divine to come to that conclusion. Bone collectors with these kids, the bakers would pay them to go find animal bones, and then he would grind them into bone meal and then use that as a filler into the bread.
Cash for your bones! Too many bones, not enough cash? Call cash bone! Ribs, skulls, spines, even certain tiny ear bones. The leg bone's connected to the cash bone!
Hey guys, Ralph here from the Endgame Investor. I got Phil with me for our monthly stint together. It's about 5 a.m. and Phil just got up. We were supposed to have an interview with another guy, but he canceled on us at literally the last minute. Like 1 minute to go, he sent us an email. So we're just going to do our thing together. And today we're going to talk about what led us to the Endgame conclusion, the separate paths we took. And we're all going to have different paths to it, and how we got here and what keeps us from losing our minds. Phil, good morning. You don't look too
Good
bad,
morning.
too puffy
It's a
for
good
5 in the morning. You look pretty good.
I'm not used to waking up at 4 in the morning, so this is we're gonna tough through this one.
Yeah. Well, it's 12 where I am, so I'm fine. So I guess I'll have a leg up on you. If you sound like an idiot, it's all your fault.
It's all good. So I actually came up with this question when I watched your show. You even have your Patreon where you talk about the biblical commentary on gold and silver being money, and I'm wondering, A, what was the point at which you made that religious connection, and how does it influence you? How does it drive you?
Well, it's hard to be intellectually honest with these things. Even if you try to, you end up fooling yourself. So I just try to keep that principle in the back of my head, that I don't know how much I'm brainwashed or how much I think I'm telling the truth. So as long as you can sort of be meta aware of that and always double check yourself and triple check yourself, there's some things that you just can't escape from unless you're like a Buddhist monk that spends all his time meditating and separating his consciousness from his thoughts. Which I've had a few stints of that when I broke up with a girlfriend once, and then I had to sort of separate from my mind and try to practice separating from one's thoughts, which is kind of eerie, but it only took me so far. I can't separate myself from what really keeps me grounded from, the knowledge of that I'm not going to be here forever and that eventually I'm going to be dead, and then I really have no idea what happens. So it all comes from that grounded level, and not many people can have that. So I was educated in a religious Jewish institution as a kid, and I come from a background of purely logical school of thought that rejected any kind of mysticism, and basically took Judaism from a logical perspective and proved it philosophically through mass revelation sort of arguments made by medieval rabbis. And I threw out all the spirituality, and I just so okay, this makes sense, and this gives me about 3,000 years of rooted history that I can look back on. So okay, I'm grounded now, and I'm just going to stay here. This is my rock, and I'm not moving from it. And economics came in later. So when I understood intuitively that Ron Paul was right, who was, the guy that pretty much said that every question I had about the system that didn't make any sense to me, he basically said I was right about these questions, and this is how I'm supposed to look at it. It was the same structure that really cemented Judaism in my head. It was, okay, we take the basic principles of logic and we build it up, and we make this stable mountain that you can now go back and you can access any part of it, and that it gives you stability, intellectual stability, emotional stability. Whenever something is shaken up in my life, I just go back to that base. And now, since I knew that Ron Paul was right intuitively, I took what I knew from him, and I looked for it in the Bible and in the Talmud. And look, people tell me, well, oh, you're cherry picking sources and you're saying this source and not that source. And what I say, yeah, I am. Well, there's a lot of discussion in the sources behind me, and a lot of them agree, a lot of them disagree. There's a lot of different things going on. And, I'm going to pick the ones that I think are right. And I'm not necessarily going to throw out the ones that I think are wrong, but I'll put them to the side and try to organize them later. So, if I can tie in, it all comes down to like basically stop stealing, right? If you understand that inflation is theft and you're not allowed to do that, well, then why are there booms and busts? Well, you can create all these academic books and all academic theories, which some of them might be true, about why there's a boom and a bust, and you can explain how interest rates influence it, and the builder analogy of Mises, and get all this into your head, and you say, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. Well, what do you understand now? You understand how theft on a societal scale destroys everybody. Basically, that's the answer. So stop stealing. It all comes down to the 10 Commandments, basically. And that's what we have to realize. Why are there booms and busts? Because people are stealing from each other. So, and then it all fits into the sources that I have. Nothing's going to sway that from me, no matter what academic argument you make or you don't make, because I know that this is all stealing.
So where does the divine spark kick in? Is it only at the very fundamentals, or is it, for example, is gold divinely provided to us?
Okay, so if you're asking me, like, I look at these things and then I look at stuff in the Bible. It's not really just the Bible. It's a lot of it is the Talmud. I'm not, Judaism is not a strictly biblical based religion in terms of we look at the words in the Bible. We always have a glass through which we see them. It's called Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law. It's a built up interpretation of all the 127, 128 generations since we got the Torah. We can't just ignore a part of it and then come up with a new thing that isn't based on anything in the past. That just it makes it unanchored, and then you just start building anything anywhere, and then you just break up as a people. So you have to stay together. But I can see things. I can I can notice basic things that I didn't see when I wasn't reading these stories in terms of an economic perspective. One is that, for example, immediately before the story of the Garden of Eden is told, we have these random verses that the Eden is in this place and it's surrounded by these rivers and there's gold here and the gold is good. Like, okay, well, why is that there? And then like you kind of just like read over it and you're like, well, okay, well, there's gold there. And then, well, it's telling you like he's putting economic things in place so that when there is a society, there will be the materials ready for it. And then it was a few years ago where I was having a discussion with a friend of mine who was actually in the U.S. Army, and he's like also a very intellectual guy like us. And we were going over the story of Eden, and he's like, well, before they ate from the tree, right? Before Adam and Eve ate from the tree, they had infinite time. They were immortal. And then once they ate from the tree, then they became mortal. So you have the introduction of something called time preference, right? If you have infinite amount of time, you have no time preference. You can do whatever you want, whenever you want. You live forever. So there's no economics. But once you have a limited amount of time, you have time preference. Therefore, you have interest rates. Therefore, you're going to die, and you have to start working, right? So I was like, oh, so this is the founding of the economy. This is why there's scarcity in the world, because we're all going to die. That kind of clarified it. So it puts us in a situation where we have to acknowledge the fact that there are a finite amount of things in the world, and that has us deal with our mortality. So whenever somebody comes at me and says, well, you can just print money and then people will be rich, well, that doesn't really jive with the fact that we're all going to die. So that has to be false. So I have some the way that religion helps me is that I cross-reference everything that's said to me in terms of basic principles. Is this possible or is it impossible? Does it mean that we ate from the tree of knowledge, or we didn't eat from the tree of knowledge and we're immortal? Well, if the conclusion is we have to be immortal, then everything you're saying is bullshit. And then I just throw you out.
I was having a similar discussion yesterday with a friend. He was saying that the dollar will never die because the U.S. can just take on the debt ad infinitum forever. There's no limit to the amount of debt the U.S. can take. I said, if that's true, then there's no need to ever repay any debt because you can just take more debt. So then that's a magic money. That's magic money right there.
Yeah. No, he's right. The dollar can never die. They can always be there. There can be like a whole garbage dump of dollars like piled up to the sky, and they'll be there. That's the dollar. It's just nobody wants it.
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody wants the unit of debt. So I'll tell you briefly my history. I used to be a rather militant atheist. After the events of 2020 and the mysterious virus of unknown origin, I became much more agnostic, and it was mostly because the people that I thought were going to stand up for liberty, freedom, and human enlightenment turned out to be the most draconian bastards. And a lot of the people, not all, I mean, there were freedom-loving atheists, there were freedom-loving religious people, and draconian on both sides as well. But the people that I would found myself standing tall next to were mostly Christians. So I said, well, I'm going to stop making fun of them because they're the only people standing with me right now. And I softened my stance. Significantly. And I knew, I'm a student of history as well, and I knew that atheism has a very dangerous side. I mean, the Jacobins in the French Revolution were atheists, and they tore down all the old institutions and started putting up their weird, they renamed all the months, then confiscated all the church land, and of course the communists are atheists as well. So I know there was a dangerous side to it. I was never one who was like, oh, if we just get rid of religion, then we will, then utopia awaits us here on Earth. I was never of that mind.
Mm-hmm.
I came to the conclusion now. Well, I don't know. I'm very confused and conflicted now on that spiritual topic. I think maybe there needs to be a religion of some kind for humanity to function. But then I'm thinking, well, if it's all just us convincing ourselves, then it's a lie. But lies don't work. Like a lot, there's no such thing as a lie that's like a good lie that's gonna make society better. So then I'm like, well, maybe there's something underneath all this. I don't know. I'm leaving it up to that. But I approach the monetary system. Same thing is that it comes from our limited time on Earth. So we have a time preference. I prefer a Corvette when I'm a young man than when I'm an older man. Because when I have a Corvette when I'm an older man, everyone just asks what I'm compensating for, and when I have a Corvette when I'm a young man, you can attract the pretty girls, right? So the things you want when you are young are the things you want earlier, are to make up for the time you have to sacrifice to get them later.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
So, but if you come from an atheist perspective, that's where you started.
Yes.
Then what brought you to honesty, gold and silver as money? Why are you attracted to it, and why not just continue as you thought before and realize that, okay, maybe the system's going to blow up, but why do you have to speak out? What's making you do that?
That's a good question. I wonder myself sometimes. I felt a moral. I really just felt a moral duty to warn everybody. I was like, well, this is going to happen, and this is really this is not a joke. This is really going to suck. So I said, I better announce to the world, or whoever will listen, like this is what to do to prepare for it. What brought me on was I told you the story before, was the silver squeeze leading to your channel, and then I said, oh my God, he's right. And so I said, well, I better let everybody know that I can.
Well, my foundation is that I assume God told me not to steal.
Yes.
Right? And if you were saying, maybe humanity needs religion, maybe it's not literally true. Brett Weinstein talks about this. He talks about literal truth versus metaphorical truth, right? That religion, in terms of that, it constrains our lust for just gathering resources to ourselves by any means possible. And that forces a cooperation. If we have this moral code that I can't steal from you, you can't steal from me, that forces us to work together to try to produce more things. And that eventually builds a division of labor. So I mean, we'll get back to what you were thinking about in a second, but this, I disagree with Brett Weinstein a little bit. I mean, I do believe in a difference between metaphorical truth, like a religion as a system that prevents us from infringing on each other, gives us all boundaries, private property, defines those things, and literal truth. Maybe one religion is not literally true, but it also emphasizes these principles. Maybe another religion is literally true. Obviously, you know what I think. But what I think happened was there was one man who figured out that everything must be created by a single thing because everything works together, right? The sun rises, the sun sets, the moon rises, the moon sets, everything goes in a pattern. There's, predator and prey, everything goes in a balance, everything's balanced out. So then you need to act in a balance. You need to act in a balanced way, or things are going to become imbalanced, and then we have a boom and bust, right? You could talk about that in terms of economics. You could talk about that in terms of society, and they pretty much come together. When there's a boom, there's also an immoral boom. They go on the same time frame, really. So I think what happened in terms of my literal truth is there was a guy who figured this out, and then God, said, okay, well, there's one guy who figured it out, so I'm going to, kind of make his soil fertile for a family, and then I'm going to come down to his family, and I'm going to tell them, well, he was right, and here are the details, and now you take these and work with them. And I'll give you advice from time to time, but don't screw up or I'll kick your ass. And that's what
So
happened.
God,
Yeah.
in your God is like literally intervening at times.
Yeah, literally intervening. I believe it literally.
So like when we had this conversation with on Ezekiel where he was baking the bread and then he was baking with human feces and he prayed to God and God said you can use, I think, was it sticks or was it goat feces?
It was a goat feces. He didn't want to use human feces, so he's like, God, I can't do this. This is too much for me. And God's like, okay, fine. So just use the animal feces.
Well, so why couldn't Ezekiel just change his mind? Why did it have to be divinely inspired?
Why did it
Yeah.
did he just change his mind and then
I
use
mean,
animal feces?
I could bake bread with my own feces and then say, you know what, this smells terrible. I'm going to use this goat feces over here. I didn't have to have a connection with the divine to come to that conclusion. But the Ezekiel chapter makes it sound like he was, really torn over it.
Well, I mean, I think he was actually talking to the creator of the universe, in whatever way that he could. I've never actually done that. I don't have the capacity to do that. I've read certain theories on what prophecy might be, and even though the people that are writing about what it is, they don't know themselves because they never experienced it. But I think it has to do something with what Buddhist monks do, and they separate their thinking from their existence, and then they kind of calm their mind down so it can be spoken to. I've never had that experience that strongly, but there are definitely points in my life where I understand that I have to go in a certain direction. There's nothing I can do about it. And even though I have the choice technically to not go in that direction, I feel like I would lose myself if I did, and I'd just be dead. So
Sure. Yeah.
we all have that, and I think that's the most that God can talk to my brain. I just don't have the capacity for anything higher than that.
So you were asking me why am I not just grounded in nihilism, atheist nihilism?
Yeah,
like,
what makes you positive?
Yeah.
What makes you understand or be okay with the fact that
I'm
you
gonna
know that the
quote
human race is going to get through this?
I'm gonna quote a guy I don't really respect that much, but I did
Okay.
respect him, and I respect him on some very limited spectrum or very limited places, and that's Sam Harris. He says I knew you were gonna roll your eyes. He says the human mind wants to create a world in which it wants to live in. So we strive to build a world that we want to live in pleasurably. If I'm sitting on the ground and I'm feeling cold and wet, and I said, well, you know what, I'll chop down a tree stump or and sit on the stump, and then my butt won't be as cold. So it's just maybe it's just more animalistic, desire to make the world more comfortable, and we are the discomfort of I could take your I could come to your house and kill your family and take your stuff, but that would be A, dangerous, and B, displeasurable. So it's better that we work together, that's sort of that base drive. We have a prefrontal cortex that separates us from the animals and lets us cooperate in ways that the animals cannot. And maybe the human psyche attributes divine cause to that. if that makes sense. But, and maybe, as I will admit, when people, turn away from God, they tend to act less morally than when they are not. And there's another guy I want to bring up. There's Matt Christensen. He's a YouTuber. Do you know him?
No.
He's a liberty-minded guy, very liberty-minded guy. But he said everyone wants religion suffers from a free rider problem. So all of us, and he's struggling with this himself. I think he's probably philosophically very similar to me. But he said, we all want to live in at least, let's just for my example, in Middle America, right? We all want to live in a Christian town. You want a town where everyone goes to church on Sunday and they all help the little old lady who needs a roof. Everyone, donates to the tithe, and that gets into the little old lady's roof, and nobody's cursing and people respecting each other, and men and women wait until they get married to have lots of children, and you have this bustling American town, right? But nobody actually wants to do any of that stuff. So we're all just religious free riders, hoping that the rest of the town is gonna do that for us.
Right.
Well, we live a life, binging on cocaine and pornography or whatever.
Well, if you think this, speaking of Sam Harris, and I mentioned Brett Weinstein, you mentioned Sam Harris. They used to be, I think Brett Weinstein's very first podcast was with Sam Harris, and then COVID really broke them apart, and Sam Harris went to the dark side. It doesn't mean that doesn't mean that he doesn't still have ideas that are valid, but like he's definitely sold his soul. He's dead. He could come back, but I doubt at this point. Once you go that far down the hole, there's the chances that you'll come back. Maybe right before death he will, but like there won't be much practical, effect from that, except besides maybe saving his own soul. But what I was going to say is that if you go back to, and Brett talks about this, if you go back, 1,000 years or so, and if a woman and a man, mostly women, if they don't have extreme caution and dressing modestly, not trying to provoke sexually, staying away from men, not talking to them too much, then they can easily get raped, or they can end up with whatever tribe, and then there will be no family units, and society will just be a big mess and mixed together. And the Torah's position on that is, what happens then? Well, then you have a big flood, and you can't really organize society that way. So now that we have the technology like birth control and abortion, and basically people who don't want children out of wedlock don't have to, so they can act as if they evolutionarily they do want that, or they don't want to organize their minds in a higher order, and they just want to act like animals without the consequences. Well, then, okay, so maybe you won't have children out of wedlock, but you'll have a society that otherwise acts like animals, just like mating with whoever they want, whenever they feel like it, whoever they can conquer. And then you don't really have the society, you just have power plays. And that's what we're turning into. I mean, because we have technology that's allowing us to loosen our morals with less physical consequences, but the consequences show up in a more diluted sense among the entire society, where it just starts falling apart once it gets too big to sustain.
And so how does the monetary medium bring us back to sanity?
Oh, well, you
like the monetary
first? Try to answer that first, and then I'll try to build on what you say.
You want me to answer that first?
Yeah, I want to see what you say.
Okay. So I can see it. Once you had that, once you made me understand that gold is money and everything else is credit, because that quote from JP Morgan has always been in my head and I never had the answer to it. Mm-hmm. I can see how it degrades. Like I see it, how credit makes people it distorts the time preference. So people think, oh, I can, I don't need to save for 20 years to buy the Corvette I've always wanted, right? I can go and take out a loan and buy it now with, 0 down. And then that changes the mind. They say, oh, I don't need to have kids when I'm, as a woman, if I was a woman, I don't need to have kids at 30 or 20, 25. I don't need to have kids at 25.
You can be a woman if you want to.
Yeah, well, these days, yeah. but I can delay my time preference. Technology will allow me to delay my time preference, and I can have, I can have a kid at 42 with, IVF, and I never need to get married, and all these ideas pop into your head. And I can do it all in credit too. I can borrow money to get inseminated. I think the cold reality of having to hand over a bag of silver or gold will sharply, to buy something that you want, will sharply decrease the time horizons and make people appreciate, savings and investments all the better.
Will also raise the value of their possessions in their own eyes, and they'll take care of their own stuff.
Yes. Yeah, if you look at the architecture, people used to put a lot of time into their houses. Like if you look at the Victorian architecture, they really wanted their house to look really pretty. And now we kind of, a modern house in America, it's very little different from a modern McDonald's. Like it's just, four wall, and
Well,
it's indistinguishable from any other house.
so I'm not sure if that's a fair analogy, because if you're talking about 1800s or even before that, when they made beautiful houses, that's true, they made beautiful houses, but not many people had houses. A lot of people just lived in holes or huts, and or just hibernated for the winter, and they didn't have anything. So at that point, you had the rich that had sound money. They had a lot of gold and silver, so they had a lot of resources to make very few examples of very fine architecture, very fine housing, very fine furniture, all this stuff that we come to appreciate. But there was like a whole mass of peasants that had basically nothing.
Yeah, I think there's a picture. I'll see if I can find it, of a German peasant, and his house looks really neat, actually. Like I mean, there obviously was periods of poverty, but I think there was in areas where middle class were allowed to develop, I think people did put a lot of effort into their domiciles when they could. Now, obviously, yeah, being a tenant farmer in Ireland in the 1830s or whatever, yeah, you're probably not going to spend a lot of time making your house look nice.
Mm-hmm.
Be scrounging around for food.
But
those guys, I mean, they were not trade. They weren't they? They were basically debt slaves, weren't they?
What was life like as an indentured servant or as a serf? Yeah,
Yeah.
you're basically working your whole life, and you can't really accumulate capital.
Yeah. So how does let me bring this back to our divine question. How does divine intervention allow this person, this hypothetical person, to accumulate capital?
I don't understand that question. What do you mean?
So, okay. If God exists,
Yeah.
then why are some allowed to accumulate capital and some are not in this system, right? If I'm born as a serf,
Mm-hmm.
maybe this is just another variation on why bad things happen to good people. But if I'm born as a serf and I live my entire life on a farm that somebody else owns, and I never see a silver coin in my life, right? How am I supposed to accumulate capital?
All right. So,
How
there
am I
are
supposed to live a divine life, I guess?
there are a few, there are some answers to that question. It can't be done until there's an industrial revolution that frees the serfs so that they have more time to accumulate capital, and then they can use their brains to try to figure it out. Right? If you're a serf and you're just living subsistence day to day and you have no other time to do anything, then you're not going to become a capitalist. But once there's some amount of capital in society that's created by the rich people that have time to think of new inventions to produce more stuff more quickly, that frees the lower classes to be able to start accumulating. So then the question is, if you're in a society that's almost purely agrarian, and the biggest piece of capital you have is like a horse and a horse-drawn plow or whatever it is, and that's it, then like what's your society going to do? So in terms of how the Israelite society is structured, right? You have the capitalists are basically the land-owning farmers, and they have a certain amount of land, and they're commanded to leave certain portions of it for the poor. If they drop certain sheaves, they leave it for the poor. If they forget, to harvest certain areas of their field, or they miss it, they can't go back and harvest it. So there's a system in place. There is a social safety net of what the poor of how the poor are supposed to function. And we have an example of this actually in practice in the book of Ruth. If you go into the Bible and you read the book of Ruth, it's a story of how, a Moabite convert, basically a rich family leaves Israel or leaves Judah during a time of famine, and they're criticized for this because they're just abandoning their family. And their kids end up marrying these Moabite women, and then they lose everything. The kids die, the guy dies, and there's this widow left with her two widow daughters-in-law who are not even Jewish, and one of them decides to stay with her and go back to Judah, and they have nothing. They start rich. He's like one of the richest people in the city, and they come back and there's nothing. So what do they do? Well, they rely on the charity that is mandated by the Torah to feed the poor, to keep them alive, and to respect them. And that's what happens. And then she ends up marrying the guy who owns the field, and then they have a kid, and his name is Oved, who's the father of Jesse, who's the father of David. So that's where the king comes from. So it's a story of how the poorest of the poor, who's not even born Jewish, can come and then give birth to the most powerful family in Jewish history. So it's possible if you treat your society as a family, and you realize that you all come from the same man, and you have a shared history, then that's what you do. You follow these laws of charity because if you don't respect the poor, they all have the image of God in them. They all have the potential to think of these amazing ideas and to help society dig itself out of perpetual poverty. But you have to give them a basic level of respect.
Okay, that kind of makes sense. Yeah. I mean, again, I don't, we're never going to, I think, solve the question of like, is this all divinely inspired, or is this people, self-organizing and coming up with it? But yeah, no,
I think it's both.
Could be.
This actually
ties in. This actually ties into the second question. It loosely ties in, and I'm gonna use it as the transition. So the second question is, why is it that for silver to maintain its moneyness for any long period of time, we have to go back to the 1700s civilization-wise? So the way I see it, the way I think you're explaining it, is that silver is a better money than gold, a raw money, but gold with derivatives works better than silver. So if we lock the gold in the vault and then pass out derivatives, and then redeemable, of course, and never overprinted, then that ends up being a better system than just using raw silver. So if we have the raw silver, if we're using the raw silver as the money, then that means that we've gone back to 1750.
Trustless. It means there's no trust of anyone to store money honestly.
Okay, so it'd be collapse of the banking system, basically.
Collapse. Yeah. If we resort to using silver coins directly, that means nobody trusts anyone to hold their silver coins for them and not steal them.
Do you think that could happen? Do you think we can go back that far?
Well, it has happened 3 times in the 20th century, just very briefly. It was like for a few days, everyone was like, I don't trust the banking system. But then the banking system kind of rebuilt itself, because the debt wasn't that high yet. So the question really is like, what societal condition would we have to be for the trust in gold derivatives to completely erode to a point where it's more than just a few days?
Yeah, because if you have to pay, like, I'm thinking, like, if you have to pay the electrical bill with silver, then that means the utility company has to send a man in an armored truck to come knock on your door and collect the month's silver, and then turn it off if you don't pay them. And then you got the milkman coming by again. I mean, we're really talking about regressing. And that's that's maybe rough. I don't know.
That's why I don't think that we'll be passing around silver coins for more than the initial blast radius of the nuclear financial bomb that falls. I think in the next few weeks, maybe months, maybe a year, I hope not a year, we'll have no choice but to pass around silver coins, because there just won't be the infrastructure to staff with anyone trustworthy to make it work again. I mean, those times are going to be really tough, but the people with silver coins are going to be very well off,
Yeah.
assuming they can protect themselves.
So
But
how would the derivative get rebuilt? Let's say they're trying to rebuild the derivatives. Maybe the private market's trying to rebuild the derivative. Are we talking about like kinesis? Is that what we're talking about? Like just a gold-backed crypto?
yeah, it would have to be from the bottom up again.
Yeah,
That's how the whole system was built in the first place. There
it
was
was.
never any big meeting on how are we going to create a global system. Like, it was just small systems that coalesce into bigger systems that is now coalescing into a humongous global system that's all corrupted. So it'll start on a local level again.
I'm gonna. The thought of having to like trade in silver again is just wild, especially like like if someone's got silver bars, they have to trade for that. I mean, is the government even gonna recognize that? Like, if you buy someone's car and you're like, I paid in silver.
Do
I
they
don't
have
know.
to recognize it? I mean, you could do this easily under the table.
Yeah, but then you're driving around with a car not in your name.
No, you could change the registry.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay. So just
I
say
don't
you
know.
paid. Say you bought the car for $400 quadrillion, but really you paid them in silver. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
something like that. I don't I
Yeah.
don't I really I don't know how it's going to work.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's I I think it was Bill Holter said people in his research, he said people just figure it out. Like in Venezuela and in Argentina, it's chaotic, but just spontaneous order, people just figure it out. So hopefully we'll just figure it out too.
yeah, we will.
I mean, we have
I
since the dawn of time. That's what humanity has been doing. And maybe you're right, and the divine will offer guidance to us in the tough times too.
Well, that's also part of what anchors me. And people confuse this a lot with hubris or racism or whatever, but I mean, I do believe that we're back, that the Jewish people are back in Israel for a reason. Not that we know what we're doing now. We don't. We're definitely completely off the rails, really confused, not setting a good example. I'm not saying we're good at what we're doing right now, but we're here for a reason. And the Bible says we're supposed to be a light unto the nations. It doesn't mean we're going to be all the time. Sometimes we're going to be like a crazy disco ball on drugs, which is what I think we are now. But I still think that we have the potential when things get really bad to pull it together here. And we have all the legal systems, at least theoretically, in place. And once big cities like New York and Chicago and LA and Tokyo or whatever, once they're all eating each other or whatever they're doing, and here it's less bad. I think that it can calm people down and show that even if there is a reset, we can rebuild, because this is how you do it, basically. I think that's gonna be my job here. I don't know exactly how I'm gonna fit into this society. I don't really fit into this society. I'm not Israeli. I'm intellectually, I'm still in America. And though I've started to get into the Israeli communities here, at least the sound money ones, and they understand me, and I can speak enough Hebrew to them and well enough for them to start getting it. But we're gonna have a big role to play here, and I think the wars that are going on are fitting into it. I don't know exactly how, but everything's coming to a head.
I mean, the problem if we go back to the 1700s, like abruptly, like in the 1700s, they were used to that. They were used to living in the 1700s. They did have a thriving, the wooden ships sailing. They had a thriving, mercantilist empire, or not mercantilist empire. They had a thriving trade empire.
Mhm.
People were trading everywhere, and they were used to it. If we were to abruptly go back to silver, you're talking about all the shipping containers not moving.
Wait, what? Why is that?
How are you gonna move how are you gonna move a ship that size on silver and not on credit? I mean, I'm talking about like a giant,
Yeah.
bear that
So
sits in the
so what you're
Panama
saying is
Canal.
the globalized systems are going to have to break up into localized systems. I mean, we saw that. I'm reading this book now, the Great Depression, a diary. It's just some guy named Benjamin Roth who was writing entries in his diary every day from 1931 to like 1940 or something like that. And he was saying like the big farms in the 1930s were breaking up because people were growing vegetables in their backyard because they couldn't afford to buy vegetables from the farms. So that's an example of everything breaking up into subsistence units. right? There's not going to be global trade, at least not in the initial stages of it. It takes time to build all that up because you got to build up the credit. In order to build up the credit, you got to build up trust. In the initial collapse of the system, there is no trust, which is why we're using silver in the first place. So no, there's not going to be any global trade. There's going to be local trade. Am I right? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
No, I think you're probably right. As disappointing as that is, though, I mean, it's disappointing, but it's also
Disappointing, but it's
good.
also great because
It's
we don't
also
have to
good,
worry
yeah.
about what they're putting in our food. Like, oh, it comes from some huge conglomerate that's like, GMOs and fake meat and or whatever else they're putting in it. I don't know, fetus juice, whatever it is. I don't know, but we don't know anymore. But if you localize it, and then you know what if it's in your backyard, you definitely know what you're growing. If it's your neighbor's backyard or your local farmer, you probably know what he's doing. You probably know him personally. We got to get back to smaller systems so we know who's in our local economy more, so we have a better relationship with them. So we don't want to steal from them because the closer we are to them. And then once you have local systems, you can build them back up to globalist systems. But we're not going to go from endgame to global trade. It's not going to be like that. We're going to go from endgame to like subsistence, and then slowly again we'll build it up.
All right, let's move on to our final question. It actually ties into silver in the 1700s, which is hyperinflation in France. The booklet we were going to cover last week or last month.
Cool. Okay. So there were a few lines in this pamphlet. Still haven't highlighted them, but what did you want to say about this little pamphlet from, what was it, the late
1920s, I think, or 1890s.
It was written in the 1920s about the French Revolution.
Yes, yeah,
right?
It was it's very, very well written. It's way better than When Money Dies. Just in terms of like how engaging it is. I mean, When Money Dies was like reading, a instruction manual for a lawnmower. It was just dry. This one was way more engaging, and it had a lot more of the human elements. So if any viewers want to, read about what a hyperinflation event looks like, then I think the Hyperinflation of France pamphlet. Who's the author?
Andrew Dixon White.
Yes, that's right, Andrew Dixon White. And he goes into how the French government and the revolutionary government, they confiscated a bunch of church lands and they wanted to redistribute it to the people. But rather than sell it for gold, they came up with the idea of we'll make a money based on this land. Now, that obviously has some fundamental problems in that not all land is created equal. So you can't really sell land, you can't make a note for land without properly essaying it, I guess. And that was one of the problems they quickly ran into, was that the government was unwilling to actually part with the land. So people would show up with the notes and say, hey, I actually want the land, and the government was like, well, we're not actually going to give it to you. Now, you said you were against church confiscations to begin with, right? You think?
Yeah, well, if it's a system founded in the confiscation of anything, then it's founded in theft, and it's going to be destroyed through theft, right?
But
Live by the sword, die by the sword.
But even if the church confiscated the land, or took it, had ill-gotten gains to begin with, like if you have somebody who got their money through theft and then someone else steals it, then the second thief is no better than the first thief.
Yeah, Gonev Mina Ganav. It's the second thief is still a thief, right? What would have to happen is that the church would have to return the land to the people that it stole from. But what does that have to do with like an entire nation confiscating land and divvying it up with notes? I mean, it's not related.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there it is very true, and not even really divvying it up. Like I said, it was hard to actually turn it into land, apparently. But the notes, of course, once they realized the note, I think the notes were indexed to gold too. It was basically the gold value of the land, or it was no. I'm wrong. It was the land. It was the land value of the land. They said if you show up with this many notes, you are theoretically entitled to this much land. Now, obviously there's land has different qualities, so I have no idea what they did to do that besides not actually allow people to redeem the notes. But one of the highlights of the book is that after the initial printing round, they quickly, they spent like drunken sailors, and they quickly found themselves in debt again. And so what did they do? Well, they just issued more notes based on the theoretical land that they're not redeeming, and more and more and more, until finally the notes were abandoned. and then they tried to reset it to the, what is it? They went from the assignat to the mandat, which was the same. It was the same scheme, but they swore on all that was holy that they were not going to betray it this time. However, that the mandat was stillborn, so it didn't even get off the ground, and then they had to go back to gold.
Mhm.
What amazes me at the end is they were talking about Napoleon, Andrew Dixon White, I think his name was. He was talking about Napoleon. Napoleon ran his entire war, and he didn't go into deficit. He just paid everything in gold. He said, "I'll only deal in gold and silver," and he was losing the war. At the end there, they were losing, and France did not have a financial crisis, which is amazing. I mean, when have you ever heard of a country losing a big war and not having a financial crisis? I mean, that's amazing to me.
Well, then what happened? I'm just building this logically in my head. What would have had to happen for a country to lose the war but not have a financial crisis? If they're dealing in gold and silver, right, and they're not inflating, then yeah, if they lose a war, then they're going to have less goods and services because some of their land is going to be destroyed. A lot of their people are going to be killed. They're going to have lower production, so prices are going to rise. But they're going to rise in real terms in gold and silver, which they're still trading. And so those price rises will keep people more frugal and more economic, and they'll preserve whatever resources they have left. So yeah, people will be poorer for sure. But there's not going to be
They're not tricked.
this huge societal phenomenon of everybody thought they had this and now they have much less all of a sudden, right? That's not going to happen. That's the consequences of a lie being revealed, not of people gradually being poorer and realizing it because they have less money and then trying to preserve resources. That means they're just becoming a little bit poorer. Okay, it happens to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that I always went under the assumption, these are my old preconceptions that you sort of had to run deficits during wars, but you really don't. Now, if you didn't win the war, so maybe you do to win the war. I don't know.
Well, you can have,
but he was so I guess French society was so scarred by the assignats and mandats that even Napoleon was like, nope, I am not going to do that.
Yeah, the problem is, how long do scars last? Eventually you forget them and then you come back to it. I mean, reading this other book, 40 centuries of price controls. 40 centuries we've been doing this to try to combat inflation by controlling prices with ham-handed tactics that never ever work. And we just keep doing it over and over and over again. So the scars, they unfortunately don't last long enough. And that's why, going back to the Bible, you need a message from the past that tells you what happens when you do these things, and you need to actually follow it. You need to read it. You need to understand these messages, or you're going to forget it. And you also have to teach your kids to take the messages seriously. It's not just a book. It's telling you these are the mistakes we made in the past. If you want to do them again, go for it. But this is what happens. Look, it's right here.
So people, do you know the profession of bone collector?
I've seen the movie with Denzel
No.
Washington.
This is totally different. Not related to that at all. So people think like colonial America was like this totally free enterprise, no regulations at all, and that's actually not true. Things like bakers were extremely heavily regulated, but locally. And when a new baker came to town, he had to take a pledge of an oath of not to overcharge, not to dilute his ingredients because it was so important. But of course, market forces being what they are, sometimes there's a bad grain harvest, but he is stuck with the grain price as it is, right? Or with the bread price. Sorry, he's stuck with a bread price that he cannot, undo because of whatever town ordinance. And the penalties were fairly harsh. So there was an underworld profession of bone collectors with these kids. That's kind of the waifs of society. The bakers would pay them to go find animal bones, and then he would grind them into bone meal, and then use that as a filler into the bread.
Cash for your bones! Too many bones, not enough cash? Call cash bone! Ribs, skulls, spines, even certain tiny ear bones. The leg bone's connected to the cash bone!
And that's where the Jack and the Beanstalk, when he's fee, fi, fo, fum, smelling Englishman, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. That's where that comes from. Bone meal was a common filler ingredient in bread to dilute it.
My bones!
Oh my god, his bone-itis!
I was so busy being an 80s guy, I forgot to cure it.
Ah,
So yeah, so the market will always try and clear. This is my big message to everybody on my channel, and anyone who ever wants to listen to me. The market will always try and clear. If it can't clear in price, then it's going to clear in quality. So
right. I was just watching this food blog on YouTube. I'm a foodie, so like I watch these things, and it was about the Philippines, and they have this whole industry called Pog Pog, I think it's called, and it's basically poor people going through the trash looking for half-eaten pieces of chicken and whatever other fast food, and then they resell it to these food sellers who like fry the crap out of it, like at really high temperature, so it doesn't really taste good, but it doesn't kill you either, and it gives you
yeah,
some nutrition. So I mean, I guess that's a way to keep people out of starvation, and it sounds not so great to us, but um,
it's probably going to sound better in a couple of years. I don't know.
yeah, these things
Don't
happen
eat pog
everywhere.
pog in the Philippines. Okay, I'm going to
Yeah.
make a note of that.
So the last thing I wanted to say about fiat money inflation in France, I would challenge you to read it and just take a little marker, and every time you see assignat and versus land, put in Bitcoin and blockchain, and it's the same thing, right? They have this man-made solution to money. We'll just take the land and then we'll divvy it up with these notes. So and then everyone gets really excited about, oh my God, we figured out the key to never-ending prosperity. That's basically what the Bitcoin people think. We have this solution now, and it can never be inflated. Well, of course it can, because there's nothing there to inflate. So every time you divide it, you're inflating it, right? So it's the same mania, except the French had a better argument, because they said, oh look, we're dividing up land, and land exists. Well, in Bitcoin, you're dividing up what?
Nothing.
So
What I don't understand is why they didn't just sell the land for gold. He never answered that in his paper. He never said why. Like they had, obviously they were sitting there thinking, what do we do with this land? They could have just sold it cheap, sell it for pennies on the dollar for gold, like Louisiana, like they did with Louisiana to America.
I think
But
the answer is they wanted to social engineer. They wanted to see if this experiment would work.
yeah,
If they
like
just sold it for gold, nothing would change. They'd
there you
have
go.
enough
This
gold, they'd
this goes all
spend
the way
it.
back to your divine stuff at the beginning. When man plays God, bad things happen.
Yeah. Yep. So that's definitely true. And we have everyone trying to play God now. Medically,
Oof.
gender affirming care. You can be whatever you want. You forget about what God created you as. Just like whatever you think you are, you are. And it'll ruin your life, but what can we do?
Okay, Rafi.
All right. Well,
This was actually a great conversation. I did it. It really, the it didn't go as what we thought it was going to be, but we still had a great conversation anyway.
nothing
So
will ever go as we thought it was going to be, but there's a saying in the Gemara, Gamzu Latova, everything for the best. And that's really an admission that we don't know what the best is. And maybe this will turn out to be a lot better than what we were supposed to be doing.
there you go. All right, I'm gonna go lie down.
Okay. Have a good
Have a good
nap.
one, man.
Bye.